for Egypt. Starting with my own introduction, and we today will be speaking about the Saudi-Iranian relations and the recently Saudi and other Arab countries' domestic affairs, or this is the case, but the whole situation was flared after Iranian protesters in Tehran stormed the Saudi embassy. They already Arab countries, of course. After that, the sever of relations between Saudi and Iran, after Saudi severed, and some other countries, Arab countries, followed suit. Now, today, the international sanctions on Iran will be lifted when the United Nations Nuclear Agency declares Tehran has complied with the agreement to scale back its nuclear program. I guess that will also have an impact on the relations. But the most important issue is how and what exactly are the repercussions of such relations on the rest of the Arab countries. We're speaking that Iran is part of problems in many other countries, including of those crises. If we are going to discuss this, then we have to see other countries.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Virgin Gulf regions. Egypt have deployed warships in the Red Sea near the southern entrance of Bab el-Mandab as part of a Saudi-led alliance fighting rebels and supporters of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen. The presidency said that the council agreed to extend the military participation in the operation in Yemen for up to 1 year or till the mission is fulfilled. France and Britain called for an emergency UN meeting on Friday to press for the lifting of siege aid entered Syria's besieged Madaya, as UN Chief Ban Ki-moon warned that using starvation as a weapon was a war crime. Thousands gathered in the Tunisian capital on Thursday to mark the 5th anniversary of the overthrow of Zain al-Abidin Ben Ali. Tunisians thronged Habib Bourguiba Avenue, the epicenter of the revolution. Some attended political rallies chanting slogans like work, freedom, dignity, and waving Tunisian flags, while others listened to concerts. For many, the anniversary raised mixed feelings, with fierce pride at the revolution tempered by concerns over continued economic problems and a rise in terrorism. Protesters and security forces scuffled outside the Environment Ministry in Beirut after several civil society activists stormed the building, but its plan drew skepticism.
Right, and to State John Kerry met with his Saudi counterpart Adel Al-Jubair in London on Thursday. The details of this meeting and, of course, the Iranian-Saudi relations in this report, and we'll come back for discussion.
Mr. Adel Al-Jubair in London on Thursday. The two top diplomats discussed a range of issues, bilateral and global ones, including Iran and the ongoing crisis in Syria. Kerry said that he was standing by Saudi Arabia in its dispute with Iran and that countries in the region should not interfere in others' affairs. But he said that he wanted diplomacy to work. Al-Jubair said that the American-Saudi relationship was strong. Washington and Riyadh have been close allies for decades, having role in the region, illegal ballistic missile program, and sponsorship of extremist groups. Saudi Arabia has taken a role of international efforts to broker Iran backs Bashar al-Assad's regime and the Lebanese Hezbollah militia, which supplies some of the most effective forces defending his role and which Washington regards as a terrorist army. Saudi Arabia marked the new year with a mass prisoner execution, killing a respected Shiite cleric alongside several terrorists. Protesters erupted in Iran and the Saudi embassy was sacked. Riyadh held Tehran responsible for the bomb attack and broke off its ties. Qari has urged both sides not to escalate the situation and has sought assurances that the Paris pact will not undermine the Syrian talks.
Right, let me welcome our guest that was on the screen right now, finally.
Well, we have to remember that Iran has played a very negative role for decades. They have been intervening in the internal affairs of so many countries. In Iraq, now in Syria, in Lebanon, before those two countries, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Yemen, in Libya, dreams of the late empire, Iranian or Persian empire. In spite of the fact that whether it has to do with the Arab region or with Iran or with Turkey, we have all an interest in maintaining stability, maintaining peace in the region. Now with this extremely volatile, and in fact those policies of Iran, they're not thinking about the real Iranian interest. We have been watching the situation and the deterioration of the situation in the region and the interventions that are coming the one after the other. So when we had that latest incident between Saudi Arabia and Iran, it was the will of Saudi Arabia, but also of countries of the region to say enough is enough. There are other alternatives to achieve such gains by establishing good neighborly relations, you know, with the region, with the whole region, not just the Gulf region, but the whole region in the Middle East, in order to execution of certain sentences that are issued by the Saudi courts and having to do with Saudi citizens. I mean, it's a flagrant intervention in their affairs, and
with very harsh words. I mean, here that when Mr. Khamenei says Saudi Arabia will pay the price, that's more than can really be accepted from a religious figure as important as such in Iran, in the domestic or the internal affairs of Saudi Arabia. That was
wiser in dealing with the relations with the neighbors of Iran. And amazingly, today the sanctions that were imposed
that's
Iran,
another point that we will go through, because that is also another important issue happening in the day. But before going to this point, let me first have now the breakdown of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We know that both are powers, particularly we're speaking about a regional power as Saudi Arabia. And Iran, with all its influence, if we may say, in some of the Arab countries, particularly who has this sectarian issue. We're speaking here about Syria, we're speaking about Yemen, we're speaking about Iraq. Yes, it has a certain influence in those countries. Now, how do you view the repercussions of this? How do you think that Saudi Arabia can really control what can be said as the bad repercussion, or the...
Arabia is not acting alone. Saudi Arabia is a member country of the GCC. And we have seen...
and of the Arab League, of course.
And of the Arab League of States, and of the ICC, the Islamic Cooperation Conference.
The OIC, yes.
The OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, I'm sorry. the Islamic cooperation.
Yes, now it is the Islamic
into cooperation, yes, instead of conference. Now, and of course, they have started by putting the matter for the attention of the Security Council, and there was a statement made by the Security Council denouncing what happened to the Saudi missions in Iran. In fact, that was a miscalculation, not just practice as far as burning the two missions are concerned, but their practices as far as their repeated intervention in the international, such a message should have been sent, not just through Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, it will have its very limited impact. But when you issue it through the GCC or the Arab League of States or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and even the Security Council, so it bears more weight and more power. So Saudi Arabia is not acting as a people, but we do not approve at all of the policies, the actions, and the practices that have been the rest of the region. I mean, international relations should be based on mutual respect.
Yes, indeed.
There is no respect whatsoever as far as what the Iranians have been doing in the region. We should mention also Lebanon, okay, and their blind, which is prevailing up till now, and again in Gaza Strip, as far as their blind and total support for Hamas, and deepening the frictions between Hamas from one side and Fatah from the other side, and having an overall impact on the whole process of negotiations between the Palestine now and the Palestinian government and the state of Israel.
Very much of Bashar al-Assad in the future of Syria, because it says that a dictator cannot continue as the president of a country who he was part of damaging or rather attacking its own people, whether or not the Syrians themselves, because even the Syrians are divided in this.
By maintaining the institutions, Syrian institutions, the army, the armed forces, before anything else, and the police forces, in such a way that we could avoid repeating the same mistake that happened in Iraq when the United States, that was filled by so many militias and groups and terrorist organizations. So what we really wish from one side, that the institutions of the state would be maintained, and before that the territorial integrity of Syria will be maintained, and we will not be seeing a division or a split of such territories, especially based on sectarian considerations. And we hope that in the coming future, and based on those attempts to settle peacefully or politically the current situation in Syria, that the decision will be given to the people, and who should decide upon the future of Syria in a free way, and this will be in the mind of the negotiators, being Syrians or the countries that are involved in the search of that settlement. We don't view things as Iran, you know, as far as the future settlement of the situation inside Syria. The Iranians, they would like to maintain Bashar, if not Bashar, his regime. They would like to maintain the Alawites. They would like to...
Why?
They would like to have an important part of the cake for the Shiites.
But Alawites are not Shiites.
well, soon they don't care that much, or as we care in Egypt, or as we care as Arab countries in maintaining the territorial integrity of Syria. And here I fear attempts and pressures will be exercised in the coming week territory.
Speaking about Syria, I cannot just ignore speaking about the Turkish latest attack on the on Daesh areas, or this is what Turkey has said in Syria and Iraq. And Turkey has a similar position like Iran of interfering in the internal affairs of many of the Arab countries. Now suddenly, all of a sudden, Turkey has been reluctant in being part of the US-led coalition against terrorism, and so is a kind of redeployment or increasing in the deployment of the soldiers on the Iraqi lands, and Turkey denied the facts, US-led coalition. Now, how do you view this scenario, and what is exactly Turkish position here in the area? What is Turkey doing?
Turkey is dealing with the Syrian issue in a very opportunistic way is concerned, and the Russians, they came up with that flagrant masquerade, I mean, pretending something and acting differently. And those double measures, fighting against Daesh and joining the international coalition in
the fight against
Syria,
yes.
I mean, and at the same time dealing with them. This double measure policy, Turkey and the Turkish people, they have to be fully aware of the fact that they are going to, are very opportunistic, as I said, and they could change their stances very easily. One time with the state of Israel and mediating between Israel and Syria, the other time having a problem with Israel as the national security of Turkey is concerned, be it within Turkey or targeting the Turkish interests abroad. So in fact, Turkey has played a very negative role as far as the situation in Syria, and has added, has poured a lot of oil on the fire, has caused that Daesh became links that were between the Turkey and Daesh. Now the problem is not only with Turkey. You recall that President Putin at the G20 summit in the Turkish policies and actions as far as the situation in Syria and the region. I would like to say something, Mona, if you allow me.
Please.
Now, the Kurdish issue is a very important issue. As far as Turkey is not going to settle the Kurdish problem once and for all, we are going to have a repercussion of the same policies and the same actions.
Well, Turkey in itself has many problems, and Turkey needs an episode to speak about, because if you're speaking here about Kurdish, they are fighting with Kurdish are already against and really are fighting, particularly the Peshmerga fighters. They are against Daesh, and they are really, but there is no, for an instant, coordination between Daesh on their own soil, for God's sake. And the same, if we can speak about Syria. So, I mean, Turkey has lots and lots of points that needs to be raised. But turning back to what we are speaking about, and Turkey is on very good terms in Saudi and Iran. So how do you view that?
Before I get to that, I don't want to mention here that we shouldn't neglect the Israeli factor.
Yes, definitely.
So, in fact, the interest of Israel and Iran and Turkey could coincide, and they could in the region. Three regional powers. And here we are talking about the Arab region. We are talking about Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the Palestinian question. We are talking about Yemen. We are talking about Libya. I mean, weakening the Arab and should be taken into consideration. Why? Why? Because who usually give the wholehearted backing to Israel? The superpower, the United States, and European countries, many European countries. So, whom is faced with threats.
Yes.
It wasn't the state of Israel.
At all.
At all. But
and I have to raise a big question mark about Daesh. And up till this minute, no one missile went into the Israeli or even the borders of Israel. But it is, or it maintains excellent relations with
Iran
and Saudi Arabia. Exactly.
Iran and Saudi Arabia. Well, this is what I have referred to by saying they are very opportunistic. I mean, they don't want to get involved in such a difference between the two countries. They are seeing the GCC playing a role, the Arab League of States playing the role, the Islamic Cooperation in this matter, bearing in mind that the current presidency of the organization lays with Egypt and is going to be transferred. Don't want to get involved and leaving the mediation to other countries.
Yes, indeed. Getting back to what we were speaking about and Iran now. Iran today will see the Iranian-Western relations and hence the Western Arab or rather Saudi relations.
As far as the relations nuclear deal is concerned, and I think that from Iran, and they want to see a real lifting of the sanctions that will reflect upon the internal situation of regional hegemonic role, unfortunately. But as far as the relations with Saudi Arabia, I don't foresee any escalation. I believe that the two countries, they will avoid any escalation as far as that difference or the higher tension, verbal tensions between the two countries, and even if it has been translated into certain measures that has been taken by Saudi Arabia lately, but I don't see an escalation. Already the situation is very volatile in the whole region, and I don't think that any of the two countries would like to see a flare-up within their relationship that would pour more oil on the fire. Bearing in mind that the two countries are important oil-producing countries.
Exactly, and this is exactly the point.
The prices have gone down.
Yes,
completely.
Yes, just $30.
Important deficit as far as our budget is concerned. We're talking here about something like $85 billion for the first time. So the situation in Yemen being what it is, the role played by Saudi Arabia as far as the situation in Yemen, I don't see an escalation between the two countries. Nobody is willing to have an escalation. But
consequences of this particular discussion, Ambassador Ali Al-Hifni, former Deputy Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.